The smoke from our barbecue was still rising when the first gunshot cracked through the trees. Children screamed. My wife hit the ground, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Our neighbor Karen, head of the HOA, stood across the fence gripping a pistol with one hand and her phone in the other, shouting at the 911 operator, saying we were armed and dangerous, but all we had were ribs on the grill and lemonade in our cups, and just when I thought this was how it would all end with my family on the ground. At our lake cabin, for simply being outside, a black SUV screeched to a stop behind us, and men in Homeland Security jackets came rushing out with rifles drawn, barking orders, but not at us. They were pointing at her, and in that moment, I realized something much bigger was going on. She didn't just hate us for breaking HOA rules. She was hiding something, and now the government was here to uncover it. Q. What kind of person fires a gun into a family barbecue and calls 911, then freezes when Homeland Security shows up? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will make your blood boil and maybe even change how you see your neighbors forever. Let me take you back just 2 weeks before the chaos. The lake cabin was everything to our family, a place passed down from my grandfather, who built it with his bare hands after returning from war. It wasn't fancy, but it was home, the kind of place where you could hear loons in the morning and children laughing by the dock every evening. We came here every summer, sometimes even in winter for Christmas. And no matter how hard life got, this cabin brought us back together. My daughter Mia was roasting marshmallows with her cousins. My mom had just pulled peach cobbler out of the oven, and I remember thinking this was the peace we needed after such a hard year. Then she arrived, Karen, the self-declared HOA president for the cabins around the lake. She walked straight onto our property holding a clipboard and a plastic cup of wine and said, "You must be the family from the city. We don't allow loud music or large groups here. After 4 p.m., it's in the HOA rules. Didn't you read them?" We were stunned. The cabins had never even had a formal HOA until recently, when a few new residents formed one without informing most of us. I politely told her we've owned this land for generations, that we'd never signed up for any HOA. She smiled a tight smile and said, "That's what they all say until they get fined. Have a nice evening." That was the first visit, but definitely not the last. The next morning, we woke up to a notice nailed to our door: HOA violation. Unregistered guests, over limit noise. Complaint: use of charcoal grill. It felt like we were being watched, which wasn't hard to believe, since every time we stepped outside, Karen's blinds twitched. She even came out once to measure how far our lawn chairs were from the lake. Then things got stranger. The power cut off one night while we were playing Uno inside. I walked outside to check the fuse box and found it open with the switch flipped. Someone had done it deliberately, and I knew exactly who, but we weren't going to let her ruin our vacation, so we laughed it off, called it cabin drama, and kept trying to enjoy our stay. But Karen wasn't just annoyed by us. She wanted us gone, and the barbecue we planned for Sunday, that's when she'd strike. Sunday morning was perfect. The sky was clear, the lake was still, and my wife was preparing her famous honey-glazed ribs. The kids were setting up a lemonade stand near the dock, and my brother had just brought a cooler full of fresh fish. We were finally relaxing. We had invited 2 other cabin families who'd known us for years, and everyone was laughing, eating, and soaking up the sun. That's when I saw her again. Karen was standing on her deck with binoculars pointed directly at us, her phone in one hand, jotting something down on a pad like she was gathering evidence. But we ignored her. I mean, who calls the police on a family barbecue, right? My mom turned on some old Motown music on the speaker. The kids danced barefoot in the grass, and the neighbors started serving food on the folding table we set up near the fire pit. But then something strange happened. A black drone buzzed overhead. It wasn't ours, and no one knew who it belonged to. It hovered above us for a few seconds, then zipped off toward Karen's property. We thought maybe it was hers or someone just flying around for fun. But then my wife noticed a red laser dot flicker on the cooler lid for half a second, then vanish. We all paused. Was that real or just sunlight? Still, we shook it off. We weren't about to let paranoia ruin the one day that had felt like a true vacation. Then she approached. Karen, in her full "I'm the boss" stride, came marching down from her side of the hill with a clipboard and her phone already dialing someone. She shouted loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is a violation of HOA regulation See no amplified music, no unregistered gatherings. And that's over 10 guests. I'm calling the sheriff. I walked up to her calmly and said, Karen, this is private property. We've owned it since the 1930s, and we never agreed to your HOA. Her face twitched. Then she screamed, you people think you can just ignore the rules and take over our lake. That sentence froze me, our lake. That wasn't about noise or rules anymore. This was something deeper, territorial, maybe even personal, and just when I thought she'd leave, she walked back to her deck and yelled, they're threatening me. I need help. They're dangerous. I'm not safe. Then we heard her clearly say into the phone, yes, operator, I see weapons. They're yelling at me, and I think one of them has a gun. I'm afraid for my life. Send backup now. The music stopped, the kids froze, and then came the sound we'll never forget. Bung, a single shot echoed across the lake. People screamed, dropped their plates, and ran for cover. But it wasn't from us, it came from Karen's deck. The shot rang out like a whip cracking across the water, and everything froze. I couldn't even hear my own breath. For a second, then the kids started screaming. People hit the ground. My brother grabbed his son and ducked behind a tree. I looked up to see Karen still standing on her deck, her hand shaking the barrel of a small silver pistol glinting in the sun. Her face was pale, like even she couldn't believe what she'd just done. My wife was screaming, is anyone hit? Check the kids, check the kids. I was crawling on my elbows across the grass, trying to get to Mia, who had curled up in a ball near the fire pit, sobbing she was safe, thank God, but she was trembling so hard, I thought she was seizing. We didn't know what to do. Should we run? Should we call someone? Would the sheriff help us? Or believe her story first? And then came the sirens, not the small-town sheriff car kind. These were deep, loud, piercing federal tones you hear in movies. Black SUVs with flashing lights tore down the dirt road toward. The cabin people in tactical vests poured out from them, not cops, but something else. Homeland Security jackets, badges, rifles, helmets. They surrounded our barbecue area yelling, hands where we can see them, get down now, now. My mother shouted, we didn't do anything, what's happening, what is this? My hands were in the air, my body shaking as I yelled back, there are children here, what are you doing? And then one of the officers stopped, looked around, and said over his radio, suspect in sight, balcony left, armed. They all turned toward Karen's deck. She dropped her gun instantly and screamed, no, no, you've got it wrong. They're the ones I called. I told you they were a threat. But the officer shouted back, ma'am, step down now. Keep your hands where we can see them. Do not reach for anything. Karen froze, her jaw trembling. Then she looked straight at me with the coldest expression I've ever seen in my life. Like it was my fault, like she still believed she was right. Homeland agents handcuffed her right there on her own deck and walked her to the SUV. She was yelling, I work with the government. You can't do this. I've reported them to DHS. They're on a list. I submitted everything to the agency. One of the lead agents turned to her and said something I'll never forget. Yes, ma'am, we saw your files. That's why we're here. And it's not because of them. It's because of you. That's when I knew we weren't just dealing with a neighborhood dispute anymore. Karen had dragged us into something much bigger than we'd imagined. Once Karen was taken into custody, the rest of us were still frozen in place. Agents were checking our IDs, scanning our faces, asking rapid-fire questions, and keeping their weapons ready, even though it was clear we were a family covered in barbecue sauce. Not danger then. One of the lead agents stepped aside and approached me calmly. This time he said, sir, I'm going to need to explain what's going on because what just happened may not be the entire picture. I nodded, still shaking. I asked if my daughter could sit with her grandmother. He said yes and signaled another officer to keep an eye on the kids. Then he pulled out a tablet and showed me something that made my stomach flip. It was an image of our family taken from a high angle, same day, same time. Only it wasn't from a phone camera, it was thermal imaging from a drone, and next to it were screenshots of Facebook posts, doctored tweets, and online complaints claiming that our family was part of a radical organization planning a training camp by the lake. I was stunned. I said, that's not us, we're on vacation. That's my mother over there making lemonade. The agent said, we know, sir, these reports came from one person over the past 9 months, the same person who called 911 today, Karen. Turns out Karen had been filing false intelligence reports to multiple government channels for nearly a year, including DHS, and even local anti-terrorism tip lines. She had created multiple fake accounts online and attached our photos, taken secretly from her deck over time, to fabricated posts and planted hashtags. She even claimed she heard us practicing foreign chants and simulating weapons drills by the lake. None of it was true, but some of it had made its way into DHS databases, which is why when she called 911 and claimed we were armed, the alert automatically escalated. I couldn't breathe for a second. Someone tried to make my family look like enemies of the state and almost succeeded, but then came the kicker. Homeland had already been watching. Karen, an agent, showed me an internal memo she'd once worked for a federal subcontractor 10 years ago in low-level security. She was dismissed after being diagnosed with paranoid delusional disorder and reprimanded for excessive use of surveillance tools outside her scope. They had reopened her file after her recent activity, and today was the final straw. Karen wasn't just a controlling neighbor, she was a ticking time bomb who weaponized fear and bureaucracy to justify her hate. She used her HOA status as a platform to gather information, invent threats, and make herself feel powerful again. And this time she nearly got innocent. People heard as I stood there watching her be driven away. A part of me felt relief, but another part felt rage, because what if they had believed her just 5 minutes longer? What if she had fired not into the sky, but into the crowd? What if one of those agents had pulled a trigger before asking a question? What if this whole thing had ended with a body on the ground instead of handcuffs on her wrists? The next morning, the cabin was quiet, like the lake itself was trying to forget what had happened. The day before the fire pit was still surrounded by half-eaten food. The music speaker lay face down in the dirt. The kids were silent. For the first time, all trippy sat by the dock with my wife, watching the sun rise, wondering how we would explain any of this to people back home. I didn't even know where to start. That's when my neighbor Ron, he'd been at the barbecue, walked over and said something I won't forget. We're calling a meeting tonight. This ends now. That night, about 12 families from the lake community gathered around a bonfire, flashlights on, papers in hand, HOA, bylaws, copies of fines, emails, screenshots. They had all been victims of Karen. Turns out she'd fined one couple for campfire smells, called CPS on another for letting their kids play outside shirtless, and even threatened to have someone's dock removed because it violated shoreline uniformity. Everyone had been afraid to speak up, thinking it was just them, but after what she did at our barbecue, nobody was silent anymore. Ron stood up and said, "We're holding a vote right now. Emergency Clause 6A. We're removing Karen as HOA president effective immediately." It passed unanimously, but that wasn't all. A week later, Homeland Security issued a statement confirming her arrest and ongoing investigation for misuse of federal communication lines, submitting false reports, obstruction, and endangerment. Her federal record was reactivated and reclassified as a threat-level incident. She was now facing not just fines or lawsuits, but real jail time. I remember sitting on our porch the day after that news broke. My mom brought me peach pie, and my daughter climbed into my lap and whispered, "Daddy, is the bad lady gone now?" And I said, "Yes, honey, she's gone," but the truth is she almost wasn't, and that's what shook me the most. One person with a clipboard and a grudge nearly ruined our lives, not with bullets, but with lies and manipulation. But here's what she didn't count on: we had each other, and when people speak up together, no amount of fake power can silence the truth. After Karen's arrest and the community vote, her cabin stayed empty for weeks. No cars, no lights, just silence, like the land itself had rejected her presence. The birds returned, the kids started laughing again, and the air didn't feel so tense anymore. Our family stayed for a few more days, not because we had to, but because we needed to feel safe again, to reclaim what that cabin had always meant to us. We cleaned up the barbecue site together, rebuilt the dock rail that had cracked during the chaos, and even added solar string lights around the porch, just like my grandfather had wanted. My mom sat out on the porch one evening watching the sun set over the lake and said he would have loved seeing you protect this place the way he once did. That made my throat close up, because she was right. This wasn't just about Karen or HOA politics or false reports. This was about family, about standing your ground, about refusing to be bullied out of your own legacy. That night, we held one last quiet barbecue with just the kids and close friends, no music, just stories around a fire. My daughter toasted a marshmallow and asked, "Can we come back next year? And maybe not invite any Karens?" We all laughed, but deep down we were still shaken, and that's when the final twist came. 2 days before we left, I received a call from an unknown number. It was a Homeland Security liaison. He said they had recovered even more data from Karen's devices than they'd expected. She had not only reported our family, but had compiled private information on at least 18 other families using drones, cameras, public records, and even hacked cabin Wi-Fi routers. She had tried to build a behavioral profile map of her entire lakeside neighborhood. Her goal wasn't to protect the HOA, it was to control everything. He told me flat out, "You may have prevented something much worse by standing up when you did." And just like that, the weight of it all came crashing down. We hadn't just survived a bad neighbor. We had stopped someone dangerous and deeply broken from potentially harming others. Before we left, I carved something into a wood plank near the dock, something my grandfather used to say: "Peace is not the absence of war. It is the courage to hold your ground when peace is threatened." So if you believe in standing your ground, protecting your loved ones, and speaking up, even when it's terrifying, hit that subscribe button right now, because this was just one story from our family's fight for peace. And trust me, there are more you want to hear. Would you have done the same if Karen lived next door to you? Let me know in the comments below.